So now we're going to begin our live Q&A session. I'll be asking some questions as well as opening up questions to the audience. And before we do that, I'd like to let everybody know exactly how this works. We don't take questions directly from the chat. Instead, we ask everyone to virtually raise their hand. If you're not sure how to do this, what you need to do is click on the reactions button at the bottom right of the Zoom, second from the right. Then click on the raise hand function in the menu that pops up. When I call your name, I will unmute you and prompt you to state where you're from and to ask your question. We ask that everybody keep their questions brief and on topic. We will then mute you. All right. If you want to ask another question, then you can just hop on the back of the line, raise your hand. So let's get started. So the first question is, can whole food plant-based bodybuilders get as big as people who eat animal products?
Great question. Whole food plant-based, I would say yes. I've never seen a head-to-head study on this. I don't know that a study has been done. I would love to see one. So I cannot give you a definitive yes, but based on the research I've seen and my own experience as a natural bodybuilder, I would say absolutely. Granted, everyone involved is natural. If you start taking performance enhancing drugs, all bets are off. Obviously, whoever is doing that is going to have a tremendous advantage that's not going to be mediated by any sort of nutritional, like excellent nutrition practices.
Okay, thank you. Our first audience question is going to come from Halal. Halal, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, yes, Halal Harris from South Florida. My question is that exercise science has often compared whey protein to other protein sources such as rice protein and soy. And they've consistently shown that whey stimulates muscle protein synthesis faster and what they consider to be more efficiently than does vegetarian sources of protein. My question is, now I know that you can build muscle through vegan sources because I do as a vegan athlete. But I'm just curious to see what your perspective is when you compare whey to other sources of protein. And then just a follow-up, they're now coming out with vegan sources of whey, that they're producing whey protein in the lab, not from a animal source. And I'm wondering if you've had familiarity with these products.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Harris. So first question is addressing the direct comparison between whey protein and some other plant protein isolates like rice, like soy. Yes, I have absolutely seen those studies that whey protein can stimulate more muscle protein synthesis than do these other molecules or do these other. One thing I want to point out is these are comparing supplements. So these are isolated nutrients we're looking at. And we're also looking at muscle protein synthesis in those studies, which is, you're looking at the genes that are turning on building protein versus the genes that don't, or the genes that turn it off. That doesn't necessarily translate into how much muscle you will build. There's more going on than just acute muscle protein synthesis. And I like to look at the macro studies where we're looking at the entire individual with all their training and all their diet rather than isolated nutrients and isolated incident changes in genetic expression. And when you look at that in the study I showed above, people on a plant-based diet can build just as much muscle as long as they're consuming adequate protein. So, and regarding the artificial or the plant-based whey, I have heard a little bit. I don't know much about it, honestly. I would be concerned that it would have some of the drawbacks of other animal proteins, even if it's artificially produced. Is it stimulating insulin-like growth factor? Is it overstimulating mTOR and increasing our disease risk, increasing our aging rate? So I still plan on sticking to plant proteins, even when more, ethically sourced animal protein analogs become available.
Thank you very much. Our next question is coming from John P. Please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm John from New York. Hi, Derek. Great presentation. What do you eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a given day?
Hey, John. Happy to tell you. This is one of the topics I read a lot about because people want to know, which is good. I focus primarily on whole foods. I'm not perfect, and I do want to enjoy myself, and I do have kids, so sometimes you just need some dark chocolate. But by and large, I have a great big serving of oatmeal in the morning. Like this morning, I had 2.5 cups of oats. I have a lot of fruit in there for my polyphenols. So lots of berries, some walnuts, apple, some figs, and then every spice in the rack, because again, I want to maximize those phytonutrients, and spices have a ton. So I'm having cinnamon, I'm having cardamom, I'm having ginger, I'm having cloves. That's my breakfast. Lunch varies, but it's usually some kind of blackened tofu dish. I either have blackened tofu over cauliflower rice with maybe some hot sauce, or I'll have like a big salad, a vinaigrette salad with lots and lots of veggies, huge salad with blackened tofu on top. In the afternoon, I have a bean shake, which you can read about on our website or on veganbodybuilding.com. I put some recipes on there, which is basically a great big smoothie. It has nuts, seeds, it has bananas, it has white beans is kind of the secret ingredient. And then spinach or kale or some kind of thing. And then dinner is a wild card. We'll have rice and beans, we'll have sweet potatoes and veggie chicken tenders. We'll go out to eat and get Thai food. But my diet is very consistently fitting that mold year round, and it has for a decade.
And Derek, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting with regard to building muscle?
Sure, absolutely happy to answer this one, Michael. This is another hot topic, and because in part of its relationship to aging, intermittent fasting has been shown to increase lifespan in many model organisms, fruit flies up to mammals. My thoughts on intermittent fasting are that, and the research I've read, because I've read a bit, is that it absolutely can still yield muscle gains. You can still gain just about as much muscle, perhaps a little bit less on an intermittent fasting diet. But you tend to be leaner. So that would be a benefit. You build just as much muscle or almost as much, but less body fat. I will say that on a diet, on a calorie reduced diet, people who intermittent fast tend to lose more muscle than those who are not intermittent fasting. So if you're trying to lose weight, it might actually be beneficial not to intermittent fast, even though intermittent fasting can help weight loss. You might lose a larger proportion of muscle mass. And kind of the cautionary point I want to make with intermittent fasting, there's two things, intermittent fasting, forgive me. There's two things to consider. One is the time of day is incredibly important. We are most metabolically sensitive and efficient, most insulin sensitive, everything beginning of the day. We're a diurnal organism. So our digestive cues and our hormonal cues are all based on the day of the sunshine. You want to get in your 8-hour window in the first part of the day. If you do it in the second part of the day, like say, for example, noon to 8 p.m., you're still, it's still shown that you see a lot of those body composition benefits. You get leaner without losing the muscle mass, for example. But a lot of the other health markers like blood pressure, like blood cholesterol, actually are not benefited. And that's because eating later in the day is not as good for you. We're less insulin sensitive, which means we're eating more like someone who has insulin resistance. So I would say intermittent fasting can be an excellent tool, but you need to make sure you're eating in the first half of the day. Other thing to consider, Dr. Walter Longo's research shows that people who intermittent fast or who fast for more than 12, 14 hours a day have twice the risk of gallstones. And it could be because you have an increased production of bile in the gallbladder to break down ketones as your body goes into ketosis from the long fast. We don't really know, but it's something to consider. If you already have an increased risk for gallstones or gallbladder problems, it might not be for you.
And do you know if that was with plant-based eaters versus animal eaters with regard to gallstones?
I would assume it was not with plant-based eaters.
Thank you. And you mentioned your diet. Do you know the diet of other like elite plant-based bodybuilders? Do they eat very similar to you? And what about the idea that we need to have a tremendous amount of protein when we're bodybuilding?
Sure. Happy to answer this. Vegan bodybuilders tend to eat a much more diverse diet than their omnivorous counterparts. And that's true of vegans in general. We just tend to eat more different kinds of food, which is healthy. But because of that, I think vegan bodybuilders eat a lot more different kinds of food. By and large, their macronutrient breakdown and their food choices mimic what mine are. Obviously, in a competition season, I'm going to be much more rigid on my choices than I am right now, where I'm just trying to maintain a healthy body weight and composition. But I do know a few vegan bodybuilders out there who go very much low carbohydrate when they diet, which is not typically done by other vegan athletes, even though it's done by the majority of the omnivorous community when it comes time to diet for a body competition. So There's some differentiation. I'd say most of them focus more on a higher carb, lower fat diet, which is very much in contrast with omnivores, but some decide to go the low carbohydrate route. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
About protein.
Oh, protein levels. There are benefits to eating above the recommended daily allowance of protein in terms of gaining muscle mass. In terms of longevity, I would say that probably the less protein, the better. There seems to be a good amount of research supporting that claim, at least until about the age of 65 or 70, and then more seems to be beneficial because your body isn't using it quite as efficiently. But by and large, the daily recommended allowance or daily recommended intake for men is about 55 grams per day. For women, it's about 45, which is pretty low, very easy to get eating whole foods. With muscle gain and muscle maintenance through dieting, quite a bit more. The research used to say that about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day was kind of that maximizing intake level. But I've seen a number of studies more recently that actually take that quite a bit lower to about 0.6 or 0.7 grams per pound. So about between half and 3/4 of your body weight in grams of protein per day. So for 150-pound individual, that would be 90 or 100 grams of protein per day, which is quite a bit more than the 45 to 55. But it doesn't mean we need to be eating 200, 300 grams a day to maximize our muscle protein synthesis. I kind of split the difference. I make sure we're getting at least that daily recommended, and a little bit more could be helpful because we do want to stay strong. We do want to maintain muscle mass. But I also think that eating excessive protein, even if it's from whole plant sources, might be a bad thing in terms of longevity.
And given that protein is in all plant-based foods, do you find that you just increase your calories and the amount of plants you're eating, so therefore you're increasing everything else along with protein, or do you just focus on getting specific protein into your diet?
It depends on, good question. It depends on how many calories you're eating and what your goals are. So very much so, most of the year I eat a lot of food. I have a big appetite and I'm very active, and I get plenty of protein from my food. I also like more higher protein foods like beans, tofu. I include soy milk in my diet, things like that, nuts and seeds. So I'm getting a good amount of protein just by eating a lot. When it comes time for a competition diet and I'm cutting calories, but I'm trying to keep my protein at the same level, regardless of how low I cut, then it becomes necessary for someone like me to shift into eating a lot of tofu, a lot of broccoli, a lot of beans, and not much else, which isn't very fun. But for the general population just trying to be healthy, I'd say absolutely follow your appetite. Make sure you get some higher protein foods in on a daily basis, be them beans, tofu, tempeh, nuts, and seeds. And you should be absolutely fine, and you should have a healthy and resilient body.